My name is Clara, and I am 35 years old. The man who systematically destroyed my family believed he had buried every last one of his sins with my grandfather's body, but he made one fatal, arrogant mistake. He forgot all about me. Before we dive into the secret I've carried for all these years, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment below guessing what the final twist will be. Now, where were we? It's strange, the intricate tapestry of memory, how the threads of a person's life can be woven into your own until you can't tell where they end and you begin. For me, my grandfather, Arthur, was never just a person. He was a place. A safe harbor. He was the scent of rain-soaked earth in his garden, the comforting aroma of old books, and the sweet cherry tang of pipe tobacco that clung to his tweed jackets. He was the quiet, steady rhythm of the grandfather clock in the hall, and the almost imperceptible hum of classical music that was the constant soundtrack to his life, played on a magnificent old radio he'd lovingly restored. His hands, calloused from a lifetime of quiet work, were impossibly gentle when he'd fix my bicycle chain or show me how to properly hold a book to preserve its spine. He was a man of quiet dignity, of unshakable routine. He'd served in the army, a fact he acknowledged with a brief nod but never a story, before settling into a 4-decade career as an electrical engineer for the county. His life, as I saw it, was a perfect portrait of post-war tranquility, a life measured in repaired fuses and well-tended rose bushes. Or so the story went. When he died a decade ago, the official cause was a sudden, catastrophic heart attack. He was 78. The grief was a tidal wave, immense and powerful, but it was uncomplicated. It was the clear sadness of losing a family patriarch at a respectable age, a man who had lived a full, good life. We gathered, my family and I, and we mourned him. We told stories of his quiet kindness, his dry wit, his unwavering patience. And then, as people do, we packed up his life into boxes and settled back into the rhythms of our own, carrying his memory not as a wound, but as a warm, comforting glow. His story had a definitive beginning, a seemingly simple middle, and a very clear end. There were no loose threads, no lingering questions. That piece was the most elaborate lie I've ever known. The truth was a cancer, hiding in the bones of our family history, and the thing that triggered its brutal, metastatic spread arrived in the most surreal and untraceable way imaginable, an email, sent not to me, but to a ghost from my distant past. Mr. Harrison. I hadn't spoken to him in 15 years. He was a cheerful, slightly awkward teacher from Ohio on a 1-year exchange program who taught my 10th grade world history class. Our entire relationship existed in the fossilized amber of social media, a perfunctory happy birthday once a year, a meaningless like on a photo of his kids or my cat. He was a forgotten supporting character from a chapter of my life that had absolutely no connection to my grandfather. That was the point. That was the genius of it. And that's why the email he forwarded to me on a miserably gray Tuesday afternoon made the blood in my veins turn to ice. The subject line was my name, followed by a single star question mark. Clara! The body of the email was brief, and through the text, I could practically hear Mr. Harrison's bewildered, apologetic voice, the voice of a good man caught in something he couldn't comprehend. Clara, it began, this is going to sound incredibly strange, and I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am if this is upsetting, but I felt I had to reach out. I received an anonymous, encrypted email this morning. I have no earthly idea who sent it or how they got my address. The message contained only 2 things, your grandfather's full name and a short, urgent message. It just said, don't ignore this. I'm attaching a screenshot below. My first instinct was to delete it, to write it off as a cruel and bizarre prank. But something about it felt serious. My gut just told me not to ignore it. Again, my sincerest apologies if this is just some sick joke, but I felt you had to be the one to decide. Beneath his kind, troubled words was the screenshot. It was a void, a black background with sterile, white, sans serif text. It showed my grandfather's name, the name I had seen on his tombstone, Arthur Thomas Reed. Beneath it, a cryptic, alphanumeric string, and /FRD10. And then the command, the 5 words that would detonate my entire reality. Don't ignore this. That I stared at the screen, my heart beginning a frantic, panic drumbeat against my ribs. A prank. It had to be a prank. The internet is a cesspool of faceless cowards and elaborate, meaningless hoaxes. But who? Who would do this? None of my friends knew Mr. Harrison. Most of them had never even heard his name. How could any single person on earth forge a link between me, my grandfather who had been dead for 10 years, and a history teacher I'd known for 1 semester, who now lived halfway across the country? The connection was so impossibly, absurdly random that it felt less like a prank and more like a tear in the fabric of reality itself. I read the message again and again. Arthur Thomas Reed and /FRD 10. Don't ignore this. The name was his, but the code? It looked sterile, technical, like a model number for a piece of machinery or a military designation. I replied to Mr. Harrison, forcing a tone of breezy nonchalance I was nowhere near feeling, thanking him for his concern and telling him it was probably just the strangest piece of spam I'd ever seen. But the lie tasted like ash in my mouth. That message wasn't spam. It was a seed. It had been planted in my mind by a careful, invisible hand, and it was already starting to sprout, its roots digging into the foundations of every comfortable memory I had of the man who taught me how to fish. That night, sleep was a foreign country I couldn't visit. The phrase echoed in the silent darkness of my apartment. Don't ignore this. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. A warning. The sender, this ghost, had gone to almost supernatural lengths to remain anonymous while ensuring the message found its way to me through a human firewall. A channel so obscure, so random, it was functionally untraceable. This wasn't a glitch. It was a finely calibrated, perfectly aimed bullet. The quiet, peaceful memory of my grandfather, the man of pipe smoke and classical music, was beginning to fray at the edges, the colors turning dark and unfamiliar. The picture was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. That cryptic message was a single loose thread on a perfectly woven tapestry, and against every instinct for self-preservation, I felt a terrifying, all-consuming compulsion to pull it. My first tentative steps into the rabbit hole began, as they so often do with a Google search. I typed and /FRD 10 into the glowing search bar, half expecting, half hoping, to find a page for a vintage shortwave radio, confirming this was all just a strange misunderstanding about one of his old hobbies. The results that loaded onto the screen were the first true shock to my system, a jolt of cold electricity that made me sit bolt upright. The /FRD 10 wasn't some quaint piece of consumer electronics. It was the designation for a massive, circular antenna array known as a Wallenweber. These structures were colossal, spanning the area of a football field, a ring of steel masts forming a giant, electronic ear. They were the crown jewels of Cold War signals intelligence, designed by the military to listen in on high-frequency radio transmissions from across oceans and continents to pinpoint the source of an enemy's whisper from thousands of miles away. They were instruments of espionage on a global scale. In that moment, the carefully constructed image of my grandfather, the humble county engineer, shattered into a million pieces. He was an engineer. He had been in the Army. The official family story was that his service was brief, stateside, and unremarkable. But what if that story was a cover? What if the quiet man who fixed power grids had once been tasked with listening to the secrets of the world? The warning, "Don't ignore this," suddenly felt immense, crushing. This wasn't about a forgotten piece of equipment in his workshop. This was about military intelligence, spying, treason. The days that followed blurred into a paranoid, obsessive haze. I lost myself in a digital labyrinth of declassified government documents, obscure military history forums, and academic archives. I searched for Arthur Thomas Reed's name alongside and /FRD 10, Wallenweber, Signals Intelligence, SIGINT. For days, the result was the same. Nothing. A digital wall of silence. I felt my grip on reality slipping, the encroaching suspicion that I was just chasing a phantom, building a grand conspiracy out of a single malicious email. I was on the verge of giving up, of trying to force the lid back onto the box. But then, exhausted and desperate, I tried a different approach. I remembered a story he told me once, a rare anecdote from his early career, about being sent to a tiny, forgotten town in the rural north to help restore power after a devastating ice storm. I added the name of that town to my search query, And that's when I found it. A single, fleeting reference in a dense, footnote-heavy academic paper on Cold War surveillance infrastructure. It mentioned a listening post, decommissioned in the late 1960s, located just a few miles from that very town. The paper named the top-secret surveillance program that had operated from the station. Project Nightingale. A songbird that sings in the darkness. My blood ran cold. The name was too poetic, too chillingly perfect. This was it. This was his world. My grandfather, the man who taught me how to tie my shoes, had been a key player in a clandestine Cold War listening project. But the questions only multiplied. Why send me the antenna designation? Why not the project name? What was I supposed to do with this piece of the puzzle? The messenger wasn't just informing me of his past. They were activating me. There was only one place left to look. My grandmother had passed away a few years after him, and their warm, familiar house had been sold. But their entire lives, every object, every photograph, every letter, had been packed into a sterile, climate-controlled storage unit, the monthly bill for which was automatically deducted from my account. A tomb of memories I hadn't had the heart to open in nearly a decade. Now, it seemed, I was being forced to go grave robbing. That weekend, I drove to the facility, the small key feeling impossibly heavy in my palm. The roll-up metal door groaned in protest, revealing a space that smelled of dust, cold concrete, and trapped time. It was a mausoleum of a marriage, stacked high with boxes neatly labeled in my grandmother's cursive. Kitchen linens, holiday decorations, grandma's clothes. I pushed them aside, my hands trembling slightly, searching for his life. His office, his workshop. The boxes from his office were a monument to his official, public life. Schematics for county electrical grids, neatly filed tax returns, engineering textbooks with underlined paragraphs. It was a perfect facade. Nothing. I moved on to the boxes from his workshop, the small sanctuary at the back of their garage that had always been his private domain. I found his old tools, worn smooth with use, half-finished birdhouses, and stacks of electronics magazines from the 70s. Again, nothing. Hope was beginning to curdle into a feeling of profound foolishness. I was a grown woman sitting on the floor of a dusty storage unit, chasing a ghost story. Then, as I reached the bottom of the very last box, my fingers brushed against the cool, smooth leather of a book. An old, handsome copy of Edgar Allan Poe's collected works. I knew this book. It had occupied a permanent spot on his nightstand. I'd always found it an odd choice. My grandfather was a man of simple tastes who favored straightforward history books and Louis L'Amour westerns. This dark, ornate volume of Gothic poetry had always felt out of place. He once told me, with a wry smile, that Poe was the master of finding things hidden in plain sight. As I lifted it, it felt wrong. It was too heavy, too dense. With a knot of dread tightening in my stomach, I fanned the pages. My breath caught, sharp and painful in my chest. The back half of the book had been expertly hollowed out. And nestled inside, wrapped in a piece of dark, oiled cloth, was a small, black, hardcover ledger. With trembling hands, I unwrapped and opened it. The pages were filled with my grandfather's neat, precise, architectural handwriting. But it wasn't words. It was page after dense page of what appeared to be meaningless gibberish. Coded entries. Dates, followed by strings of letters and numbers, then more dates, then cryptic, hand-drawn symbols. It was a diary, written in a language meant for an audience of one. Except for the very first page. On it, written in plain, clear English, was the key. A complex substitution cipher, its logic rooted in the page numbers, line numbers, and word counts of the very book that served as its hiding place. Poe's words of darkness and madness were the key to unlocking my grandfather's final, terrible secrets. If you're on the edge of your seat and finding the story as unbelievable as I did living it, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel, because what I found in that ledger was a truth more terrifying than any Poe horror story, a truth that was about to come knocking on my door. The week that followed was a descent into obsession. I barely ate. I didn't sleep. My world shrank to the confines of my dining room table, which was now command central, covered in papers, the Poe book propped open, the black ledger its dark heart. Hour after painstaking hour, I sat there, cross-referencing, decrypting, translating. I was an archaeologist of my own family's history, brushing away the dust from a life I never knew existed. And the story that emerged, letter by agonizing letter, was one of unimaginable betrayal. Project Nightingale was real. And my grandfather hadn't been a mere engineer. He was one of its lead analysts, a master of the esoteric art of listening. His job was to decipher the enemy's whispers. But at some point, he had broken the cardinal rule. He had turned his ear inward and started listening to his own side. The ledger was a meticulous, damning record of high treason. It detailed a conspiracy festering within the heart of Project Nightingale, led by a senior officer whom the ledger referred to only by the code name Helios. Helios had been selling highly classified intelligence, troop movements, agent identities, technological capabilities to the Soviets. The ledger was chillingly specific, listing dates of clandestine transmissions, the routes of secret money transfers to Swiss bank accounts, and most terrifyingly, the names of other analysts within the project, colleagues of my grandfather, who had gotten too close to the truth. Next to each of those names was a date and a single word: accident. A car crash, a hunting mishap, a sudden, unexplained disappearance. My grandfather had discovered the rot at the core of the operation. He couldn't go to his superiors. Helios was a senior officer, and my grandfather had no way of knowing how deep the corruption went. So he did the only thing he could. He documented everything. He created the ledger as an insurance policy, a silent weapon to be deployed if the worst should happen. He built a bomb and hid it in a book of poetry. Then, the coded entry stopped abruptly, about a year before his official retirement. A few blank pages followed, and then, one final, harrowing entry, written not in code, but in plain, shaky English. It was dated just 3 days before his heart attack. Helios knows. He's cleaning house. If you are reading this, I have failed. The truth must still come out. Trust no one who comes offering official help, especially not his man, the one they call Robert. My heart hammered against my ribs, so hard I thought they would break. My grandfather's death wasn't a tragedy of old age. It was an execution. He was silenced. For 10 years, I had mourned a comfortable lie. The truth was that my quiet, gentle grandfather, the man who smelled of old books and pipe smoke, had been murdered for what he knew. And I was now holding the very thing that had signed his death warrant. That cataclysmic realization had barely begun to settle when my own world was violently and irrevocably upended. I'd been so consumed by the ledger, so lost in the past, that I'd grown careless in the present. I left my apartment for less than an hour to get groceries, forgetting to lock the deadbolt. When I returned, the door was slightly ajar. A cold dread, primal and absolute, washed over me. I pushed the door open with a trembling hand. The apartment was a disaster. Not the work of a common thief. It was a professional, targeted search. My couch cushions had been sliced open with a knife, their stuffing pulled out. Books were swept from shelves, their pages rifled through. My mattress was flipped, my clothes pulled from drawers. They hadn't touched my laptop or my wallet, both sitting in plain sight on the kitchen counter. They were looking for something specific. They were looking for the ledger. By some miracle of burgeoning paranoia, I had it with me. In the past few days, it had become a part of me, a dark appendage I couldn't bear to let out of my sight, and it was nestled safely at the bottom of my backpack. I backed out of the apartment slowly, a silent scream building in my throat. This wasn't a Cold War story anymore. The ghost my grandfather had been fighting was real, and now it knew my name. The paralysis of pure terror lasted for 2 days. I checked into a cheap, anonymous motel on the edge of town, paying in cash and using a fake name. I sat on the lumpy bed, clutching the ledger to my chest, my mind a raging storm of paranoia. Every footstep in the hallway was them. Every set of headlights that swept across the parking lot was Robert, the cleaner, the man my grandfather had warned me about from beyond the grave. Who was Helios? This phantom who still wielded so much power, who could, decades later, dispatch a team to expertly toss a random woman's apartment? I forced my shaking hands to open the ledger again, my eyes scanning the coded entries, desperate for a clue, any detail I might have missed. And then I saw it. It wasn't a name. It was a pattern I had previously dismissed as part of the code. A specific string of numbers and letters that appeared several times, always next to a transaction linked to Helios. Staring at it for what felt like the 100th time, I realized with a sudden, electric shock that it didn't fit the cipher's pattern. It was something else. A military service tag number. My fingers flew across my laptop's trackpad. I found an online archive of public military service records. I searched for officers who held supervisory roles at the listening post during the years of Project Nightingale. I cross-referenced that list of names with the service tag from the ledger. A single name matched. Elias Vance. The name hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Elias Vance wasn't some forgotten Cold War relic. He was a lion of the political establishment, a former intelligence director turned revered elder statesman. A man whose calm, authoritative face was a fixture on news programs where he was trotted out as a respected foreign policy expert. He was Helios. He was a monster hiding in plain sight, a man who had built a celebrated, decades-long career on a foundation of treason and murder. And my grandfather had the proof. Now I did. In that moment, the original message finally made perfect, horrifying sense. Don't ignore this. It wasn't a message from the great beyond. It was from someone here on Earth. Someone who knew about the ledger. One of my grandfather's old colleagues, perhaps. Someone too old, too powerless, or too terrified to act themselves, but who knew that the only person on Earth who might have access to Arthur Reed's last secrets was his granddaughter. They had used Mr. Harrison, a completely random, untraceable node in my life, as a human firewall to deliver the spark without getting burned themselves. They had lit a fuse, praying it would lead to the bomb my grandfather had built. I was holding the bomb. But what could I possibly do? Go to the police? The FBI? My grandfather's final words were a scream in my mind. Trust no one who comes offering official help. Vance's influence was the stuff of legends. His tendrils reached into every corner of the government. Who could I trust? The decision, it turned out, was not mine to make. The next evening, there was a knock on my motel room door. It wasn't a frantic, aggressive banging. It was a calm, polite, almost gentle knock, knock, knock. I froze, my body rigid with terror. I crept to the door, my heart a hummingbird in my throat, and peered through the peephole. Standing outside was a man in his late 50s. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored gray suit and had a kind, weary face, with eyes that seemed to hold a hint of sympathy. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a tired bureaucrat on the verge of retirement. Then he held up a leather wallet, flashing a government badge. "Clara Reed," he asked, his voice calm and muffled by the door. "My name is Robert. I'm with a discreet government agency. I believe you have something that belongs to us. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help. We really need to talk." Robert, the name from the ledger. The cleaner. My grandfather's final warning. My mind raced, 1,000 panic scenarios playing out in a split second. Running was pointless. Screaming was useless. He was the wolf at the door, dressed as a shepherd. I had only one card to play. I had to let him in. Taking a deep, ragged breath, I unlocked the door and opened it. "You'd better come in," I said, my voice trembling only slightly. He stepped inside, his calm eyes doing a swift, professional scan of the shabby room before they landed on me. He offered a small, disarming smile. "Thank you for being reasonable, Clara. This is an exceptionally delicate situation. What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. "The ledger," he said simply, his tone that of a man asking for a misplaced library book. "Your grandfather was a patriot, Clara, but he was misguided. He saw things he didn't understand. That book you're holding contains highly sensitive historical information that could, if released, cause irreparable damage to this nation's security." "You mean it could cause irreparable damage to Elias Vance?" I shot back, the words tasting like acid. Robert's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went dead and cold. The mask of the friendly bureaucrat slipped, just for a second, revealing the predator beneath. "Mr. Vance is a decorated public servant. Your grandfather, bless his heart, was meddling in affairs far above his pay grade. He documented a series of necessary but unpleasant actions taken during a time of war. The release of that material now would serve no purpose but to destabilize fragile alliances and ruin the reputations of good men. And the men he listed as accidents in that ledger? The men my grandfather worked with? Were they good men, too? Robert let out a soft sigh, a theatrical performance of exhausted patience. War is a messy business, Clara. Your grandfather was a man who couldn't accept that reality. Now, his unfortunate legacy is this ticking time bomb you're holding. I'm here to help you defuse it. Give me the ledger, and you can walk away. Go back to your life. Forget any of this ever happened. It's the sensible, rational thing to do. He was so smooth, so maddeningly reasonable. He was gaslighting me, attempting to reframe my murdered grandfather as delusional and himself as the voice of sanity. He wanted me to believe that the safest choice was to hand over the evidence of my grandfather's execution and walk away. But as he spoke, my eyes darted to the ledger on the nightstand. I had read the final page, the final warning, over and over again until the words were burned into my memory. My grandfather hadn't just named Robert. He had described him with chilling accuracy. He is not what he seems. He's smooth, persuasive. He will make you feel like you are being irrational. He will promise you safety. Do not believe a single word he says. He is a cleaner. The one, Helios, sends when the mess is too big for a simple accident. And then, my grandfather, my brilliant, quiet grandfather, had added one last, incredible failsafe. A bluff from beyond the grave. A final move in a chess game he knew he would lose. My eyes locked with Robert's. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling a strange calm wash over me. The thing is, Robert, I said, my voice now shockingly firm, you're too late. A flicker of genuine confusion crossed his face. What are you talking about? The ledger, I said, gesturing to the book on the nightstand. That's a copy. A very good one, I admit. My grandfather was meticulous. The original? I had it digitized the moment I understood what it was. As we speak, it's in the hands of 3 different investigative journalists at 3 major international newspapers, along with a full, detailed account of who you are and who Elias Vance is. And it's all on a dead man's switch. If I don't check in with my contacts every 12 hours with a specific code, the entire dossier goes public. It was a lie. A complete, total, magnificent lie, born of desperation and my grandfather's final whispered instruction. The one and only real ledger was sitting 5 feet away from him. But I was betting my life that in a world of spies and shadows, he couldn't afford to be 100% certain I was bluffing. Robert's face, for the first time, completely lost its composure. The friendly mask didn't just slip, it melted away, revealing the cold, reptilian predator underneath. He stared at me, his eyes boring into mine, searching for the lie for the tell. The silence in the cheap motel room was a physical thing, suffocating, absolute. My entire life was hanging in the balance of that single, terrifying moment. He was calculating the odds. If I was telling the truth, killing me would be the single worst thing he could do. If I was lying, he could take the ledger and finish the job his boss had started 10 years ago. He took one predatory step toward me. This was it. My bluff had failed. And then he stopped. He let out a long, slow, quiet breath, a sound of grudging respect. A thin, cruel smile touched his lips, devoid of any warmth. You're clever, Clara, he said softly, his voice now stripped of all pretense, a chillingly genuine whisper. Just like your grandfather. He was clever, too, right up to the very end. He turned without another word, walked to the door, and stepped out into the night, closing it gently, silently behind him. I stood frozen, listening to his footsteps fade away, before my legs finally gave out and I collapsed onto the threadbare carpet, shaking uncontrollably. I had faced the monster from my grandfather's past, and somehow, through a lie whispered from the grave, I had survived. The night after Robert's visit was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor, my back against the door, clutching the real ledger, convinced he would return. But he didn't. My grandfather's bluff had worked. It had bought me time. But I knew this wasn't over. The danger hadn't vanished. It had just retreated into the shadows to regroup. Robert's last words weren't a concession. They were a promise. I had made a very powerful enemy. I couldn't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. More than that, I couldn't let my grandfather's courage, his sacrifice, be for nothing. He had built the weapon. It was my duty to fire it. The next morning, I made a choice. I would turn my lie into a reality. I found the name of a renowned investigative journalist, a woman with a reputation for breaking stories about corruption in the highest echelons of power. I contacted her through a secure, encrypted channel, the same kind of tool the original messenger had used to contact Mr. Harrison. I told her I had irrefutable proof that a celebrated American hero was a traitor and a murderer. We met 2 days later in the cavernous reading room of the city's main public library. The irony was not lost on me, our clandestine meeting surrounded by millions of books, while the most important book of all was on a thumb drive in my pocket. I sat at a long oak table, my heart pounding, until a woman who matched her photograph sat down in the chair opposite me. She looked at me with sharp, appraising eyes that missed nothing. Without a word, I slid the small thumb drive across the polished table. It contained everything: the fully digitized ledger, my written account of the cryptic message, the break-in, the encounter with Robert. Her expression was unreadable as she picked it up. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" she asked, her voice a low whisper. "If this is what you claim it is, these people will stop at nothing to bury it. And you along with it. They already killed my grandfather for it," I said, my voice steady. "He tried to do the right thing, and they erased him. I'm not going to let them win. His truth deserves to see the light of day." She gave a slow, deliberate nod and stood up. "Go home, Ms. Reed. Be very, very careful." And then she was gone, melting back into the crowd, taking my grandfather's legacy, his justice, with her. For 6 months, there was only silence. I lived in a state of suspended anxiety, every unfamiliar car on my street a potential threat, every unknown number a harbinger of doom. Then the story broke. It was a global bombshell. The Vance dossier, the headline screamed. A multi-part expose that laid bare decades of treason and murder, all meticulously documented by a heroic, unnamed analyst who had paid the ultimate price. Elias Vance was disgraced overnight. A massive federal investigation was launched. His entire world, a glittering empire built on secrets and blood, came crashing down around him. He was never charged with murder. The evidence was too old, the deaths too cleverly disguised, but his name became a synonym for the highest form of betrayal. Justice, when it finally arrived, wasn't delivered by a gavel in a courtroom, but by the relentless glare of the truth on the front pages of newspapers around the world. But it wasn't enough. His reputation was destroyed, but he was still a free man, living out his days in seclusion in his vast, isolated estate. He had taken my grandfather, the center of my world. His public humiliation felt like an insufficient price. And that's when I remembered the final secret from the ledger. It was the key to my real revenge. The plot twist wasn't what my grandfather wrote about Vance, it was what he wrote about Vance's own life. Among the records of treason was a small, personal file. Vance had an illegitimate daughter, given up for adoption at birth. For 50 years, he had been secretly using intelligence resources to search for her. It was his one private obsession, his sole human vulnerability. The ledger contained her birth name, her adoptive parents' names, the city where she'd grown up. My grandfather hadn't just documented Vance's crimes. He had found the one thing Vance cherished more than power. He had found his daughter. And now, so had I. A year after the story broke, I drove to his estate. I arranged a meeting under the pretense of being a writer, seeking a final comment. He met me in his cavernous, darkwood library. He was a ghost of his former self, a stooped, broken old man, consumed by bitterness and disgrace. He looked at me with hollow eyes. "What do you want?" he rasped. I didn't say a word. I simply placed a single, recent photograph on the table in front of him. It was of a woman in her early 50s, laughing with her 2 children in a sunny park. It was his daughter. Recognition, then desperate, frantic hope flashed in his eyes. "Who is she? Where is she?" he begged, reaching for the photo. I pulled it back. "Her name is Sarah," I said softly. "She's a kindergarten teacher. She's happy. She has a wonderful family. She has no idea you exist." He stared at me, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please," he whispered, "the great Elias Vance broken. I just want to meet her. Before I die. Please." I looked into the eyes of the man who had ordered my grandfather's death, who had stolen the kindest man I ever knew from my life. I thought of the scent of pipe tobacco and the feel of his calloused hand in mine. "No," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. You took my family, so I'm taking yours. You will live out whatever wretched time you have left on this earth, knowing that a part of you is out there, happy and whole, and you will never, ever get to touch it. That is my justice. I stood up, left the photograph on the table, and walked out of his life forever, leaving him alone in the dark with the ghost of a life he could never have. The immediate danger has passed, but the truth is, I'll never be the same. I finally understand my grandfather. He wasn't just a quiet man who loved books. He was a silent hero who fought a lonely war and, even in death, laid the groundwork for a final, devastating victory. He was silenced, but he refused to be quiet, and I'm just glad I was there to hear him. If this story left you speechless, smash that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, was justice served, or did I go too far? And don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss next week's chilling confession.